Today's session is very jam-packed and very exciting. We're starting off with a conversation with Dr. Enrique Sala and Bella Lack, moving on to a conversation with Malaika Vaz, Dr. Paula Kahumbu, and then a mid-session activity, and then a panel with three amazing young storytellers about the power of youth storytelling. So let me go ahead and introduce Dr. Enrique Sala. I am beyond thrilled to introduce our first guest. Dr. Enrique Sala is a National Geographic Explorer in Residence. He founded and leads Pristine Seas, a project that combines exploration, research, and media to inspire country leaders to protect the last wild parts of the ocean. National Geographic Pristine Seas has explored and documented some of the wildest places in the ocean and has made unique discoveries which have paved the way for the establishment of some of the largest marine reserves in the world. Creating and sustaining these protected areas is critical to securing the future of all life on Earth and meeting the goal of protecting at least 30% of the planet, land and sea, by 2030. Together, Pristine Seas and National Geographic and the WIS Foundation's Campaign for Nature are working to achieve this 30 by 30 goal as a milestone towards protecting half of the planet by 2050 in order to restore the balance with nature and secure a healthier, more equitable future for the people and the planet. Reserva is proud to have Campaign for Nature support in our 1 million Letters for Nature campaign. Dr. Enrique Sala will be speaking with Bella Lack, Reserva's youth director and co-founder of the Youth Council, and a very distinguished team conservationist who began campaigning at just 11 years old. She spreads messages to youth around the importance of protecting wildlife. She is an ambassador for Born Free Foundation, Save the Asian Elephants, RSPCA, and the Jane Goodall Institute. Last year, she worked on a feature-length documentary starring primatologist Jane Goodall in order to uplift solutions to the 6th mass extinction crisis. Bella is currently writing a book called Children of the Anthropocene to highlight the youth that are combating the environmental crisis. Enrique and Bella, we are so happy to have you. Please take it away. I will stop sharing my screen now.
Thank you, Sruthi, so much for the introduction. I've just been on a mad rush around. I'm at school at the moment, on a mad rush to find an empty classroom, and I managed to make it just in the nick of time. So I'm so happy to be here, to be hosting this, and to be speaking to you, Enrique. So I think the best place to start, because there's so much I want to cover, I think the best place to start would be how you began your conservation journey. Maybe when you were a young boy, what sort of ignited that spark within you?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for inviting me today, Bella. It's a pleasure talking with you. I'm glad you were able to find an empty classroom. Well, you know, it was when I was a little boy growing up on the Mediterranean coast of Spain, watching the documentaries of Jacques Cousteau on TV, you know, the undersea world of Jacques Cousteau. Young people may not know him, but he was a French explorer with a red hat, who had a team of fearless divers going around on a ship, the Calypso, going around the world and exploring. Back then, there were 3 TV channels, actually 2 TV channels. Now, today, for a young person, it might be unthinkable, but there were only 2 TV channels. And he was the only one showing us the underwater world. So I was completely fascinated. But when I went swimming in the Mediterranean Sea of my childhood, none of what he showed us on his TV shows was there. You know, he showed us this beautiful marine life and richness, whales, dolphins, sharks, coral reefs, seals, big groupers. And when I went swimming, what I saw was fishes about this big and sea urchin. That was it. So it was then that I started fascinated about the ocean and wanting to explore it.
So you went into a career of conservation, and you had a moment of transformation, didn't you, at the beginning? So let's separate into 2. There was a moment before when you were a researcher, and now you define yourself as a storyteller. So what changed there?
Yeah, you know, you never know what's going to happen to you during your life, right? So I wanted to be an ocean explorer because of the inspiration from Jacques Cousteau, but then I became a marine biologist. And I became a professor at the University of California. And my job was to study the impacts of humans in the ocean, the impact of fishing and global warming. But one day I realized that all I was doing was writing the obituary of the ocean. I felt like the doctor who's telling you how you're going to die with excruciating detail, but not offering a cure. So that day I decided to quit my job as a professor and work on the cure. And I decided to come to National Geographic because I thought it was the right organization, an institution with over 130 years of history of research, exploration, but also education and storytelling. And I thought that combining those assets, we could help save vital places in the ocean before it's too late. And going to your second epiphany, the storytelling, when I was a professor, I thought that if we had all the information, all the science, all the data, people, decision makers, policy makers would be able to make informed decisions. But when I left academia, I realized pretty quickly that information alone is not enough, that people respond much better to stories. People make a lot of decisions based on emotion, not on data. So we have developed a new method that combines the storytelling with our films and our stories of going to these places, and then the scientific data that complement. So we first reach out to the heart of people to make them fall in love with the ocean, and then we show them why it is important.
So one thing I was wondering is, you speak a lot about falling in love with the ocean, and I've heard lots of conservationists speak about this sort of engaging more people by making them fall in love. But it's much easier to make people fall in love with, for example, an elephant that they can see. But what about the more elusive, obscure, deep sea creatures in the ocean? Because I think that's a lot harder.
Yeah, that you're absolutely right, Bella. Out of sight, out of mind. Baby elephants or panda bears, they are so cuddly. Everybody sees them on TV or at the zoo. And it's much easier to fall in love with a panda bear than with a cod or a shark, for example. But I would recommend everybody to just get in the water. If you are fortunate to go to the coast on a vacation, or you live near the shore, just get a snorkel and mask like I did when I was a kid, and just get in the water and start looking, because you don't need to see the big whales to fall in love with the ocean. There are things happening in a scale about this big. There are all these little algae and little animals living within the algae, and if you have enough patience, you can see an entire universe unfold in front of your eyes. We can find beauty and wonder, anywhere from a scale this big to the global ocean.
So for you, what epitomizes that beauty and wonder? I mean, I know you fell in love with the ocean when you were a young child, but now, could I ask, this is one of the hardest questions, which I think to ask anyone involved in conservation, but do you have a favorite species or a favorite coastline or something like that?
Well, this is like asking a parent which one of your kids you love the most, right? But no, there are wonderful places all around, but there is a place that everybody knows. I've been to places that nobody ever heard of, places that are remote in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, uninhabited, but there are a few places that people have heard about, like the Galapagos Islands, for example. And most people think of the Galapagos Islands as the home of the iguanas and the giant tortoises and the finches that Darwin studied. But underwater, which is most of the Galapagos Island territory is underwater, it's one of the most amazing places in the world. You have iguanas that can dive to eat algae. You have sea lions, baby sea lions coming and checking you out, so curious. And then you have one place, Darwin Island on the north, that has the greatest abundance of sharks in the solar system. It's a place where you dive and you can, if you stick to the bottom and are quiet, you can see a school of 200 hammerhead sharks swimming over you. And then you turn around and you see this 15-meter long, like a school bus, 15-meter long whale shark, a giant, is swimming powerfully but gently in front of you. These are the places that keep me going. These are the places that still fascinate me and give me hope.
someone's giving you hearts in the audience, and I think you really bring it alive just by describing it. And I think if you can do that just by describing it, I can't imagine, in your work, in sculpting these narratives that you're doing, how much you bring it alive for people. So once you've instilled that love, that inspiration, and that wonder in people, how should people translate that into action? What would you say at the moment is the most important thing we do?
Well, there are so many. Well, it's not me that instills that love. It's nature itself. People just need to get out there. If you spend enough time looking at an oak tree on your local park, in the United States, for example, oak trees are home to 100 different species of caterpillars and butterflies, and hundreds of species of moths and birds. So you can see an entire universe, if you pay enough attention to one natural place. But I think, when people ask me this question all the time, what can we do? And there are so many things one can do, right? We can have a long laundry list, but there's one thing I like to tell everybody that would be good for you and for the planet, which is eat more plants and less animals. Because if we ate less animals, we wouldn't require less land to produce our food. That land could be given back to nature, which produces many other benefits for us, like oxygen, and home to the pollinators that pollinate our crops. And big forests produce rain also, and protect us from floods. And keep, trees, parks in cities, they keep the cities cooler during the summer too. So we obtain so many benefits from nature for free. So if we gave more space to nature, we would benefit from that. Also, the production of meat on the land produces a huge amount of methane, the most powerful greenhouse gas, right? Because the cows burp a lot. So a plant-based diet would require less land, would require less fresh water. We would tax our earth less, but also it would be good for our health too, because we can obtain most of the proteins and micronutrients that our body needs from plants.
Yeah, it's really interesting that when you talk about giving nature or giving land back to nature, because I know you've been working on this, and I know lots of the people listening know about the 30 by 30 campaign. So could you speak more a bit about your involvement and the aims of that?
Yes. So we have transformed our planet in a way that is unimaginable. Right? We have turned wild into tame. Today, 3/4 of the inhabitable land have been transformed by humans. And we have turned prairies and into monocultures, into cornfields. We've turned wetlands into shrimp farms or rice farms. We've turned plains into cities. 96% of the mammals on the land is us and our domesticated livestock. Only 4% is everything else, from pandas to tigers to polar bears. In the ocean, 90% of the large fish are gone. We kill them. So we have transformed our planet in such a way that we are using more resources than what the Earth can produce in a renewable way every year. So we are acting as if we had 1.5 planets. Nature cannot keep up with us. Nature cannot continue providing for us any longer or absorb our impacts. Now we think about the loss of nature, but when you think about the climate crisis, the global warming, half of the solution is cutting our carbon emissions, our carbon pollution. But the other half of the solution is drawing down, sucking all of this excess pollution that we have thrown into the air and into the water. But we don't have the technology. But nature does. The technology is called trees and wetlands and grasslands and kelp forests and mangroves. So nature is the best ally we have to help us fight climate change. And how much do we need? Well, we don't have enough nature because nature already cannot keep up with us. So how much do we need? The science is very clear. If we are to avoid the extinction of 1 million species and the collapse of our life support system, if we are to achieve the goals of the Paris Climate Agreement, we need half of the planet in its natural state, which is more than what we have now. So we need to start with a very ambitious target of at least 30% of our land and our ocean protected by 2030. This is where the 30 by 30 number comes from.
One thing I think which I had a misconception about is, what does this 30 by 30 look like? Because, you know, if we're imagining it as land completely removed from human cohabitation, is that viable? Is that even possible? Because what sort of gives me hope is the possibility that we can learn to live alongside nature, and that we can welcome nature into our city. And I say welcome nature into our cities. The cities have sort of been, you know, planted over natural systems. So it's more about allowing nature to return. But what does the 30 by 30 look like? Is it sort of these stark divisions between humans and nature, or is it much more nuanced than that?
Absolutely nuanced. It's not black and white, right? So for the land, we know that there are places that have been managed traditionally by indigenous peoples, like in the Amazon, for example. And these places are home to some of the greatest biodiversity on land. So we need to make sure that indigenous peoples continue, enjoying their cultures and their livelihoods, that we help them secure the rights to their lands. Indigenous peoples have to be at the forefront of 30 by 30, and without them it's not going to be possible. So that's one way. There are other areas, like areas in the ocean that are still remote and near pristine. We need to keep these areas untouched because they are the few wild places left. So these areas have to be safe from fishing, oil mining, drilling. We have seen with our research in the ocean that when we protect an area fully from extractive activities, from damaging activities, marine life comes back spectacularly. When you don't kill the fish, they take a longer time to die, they grow larger, they get really big, and we know that the big females produce a much larger amount of eggs, which helps to replenish the areas around these protected areas, right? So we have seen the local communities, we have seen fishermen get more fish around these areas because they are like a fish banks, like a bank account. So we need a combination of areas that are fully protected so nature can come back and help regenerate the areas around. And also we need all these areas that are already managed traditionally by indigenous peoples to continue like this. We need to preserve these places and these peoples from the threat of industrial exploitation, which is the enemy number one of nature and our own survival.
Mm-hmm. I think I'm sort of selfishly searching for an answer here because it's a question I've been thinking about a lot. But if we're going to encourage people to create these divisions between us and nature and to leave bits untouched, we're sort of propagating this idea that there is humanity and then there's nature and there's this division between us. And I recognize now we're in this place, we're in a crisis, and we have to now leave places untouched if we're going to regenerate and restore. But how do we overcome this thing which seems to be sort of hammered into us in the Western world, at least, that we are above nature, that we're on a pedestal, because so many people seem to believe that?
No, you're absolutely right. We are part of nature. We are part of the evolution of the planet. And we are the ones who have created the boundaries. When you look at the boundaries between a city and the nature around it, right? And we are the ones who have created the boundaries between a monoculture, agricultural field, or one species, corn or soy, and the forest nearby or the grasslands nearby. We are the ones who have degraded, destroyed, simplified the diversity and the beauty of life in the world for our short-term needs. So we need to do several things. One, we need to preserve what wild is left. We need to restore much of our degraded areas. But as I mentioned before, indigenous peoples have shown that people can live in harmony with nature and preserve all this biodiversity and all the benefits we obtain from it. And when it comes to cities, we need to rewild our cities. We need to restore, we need to revegetate. There is not enough green. There is so much research showing that the more green, the more parks, the more native trees there are in cities, the cleaner the air, the lower the temperature during warming events in the summer, the better protected the cities are from floods because of the effect that the vegetation has to attenuate and capture rainwater, the more species of everything, and also the healthier and the happier people are. So what I would say is that we don't need to create walls. We need to preserve what we have left, but we need then to put more nature everywhere we are.
Mm-hmm. I know one way you've been going about that is speaking a bit about ecosystem services, which I think is really interesting. And I think lots of the people watching might have heard of the Dasgupta review I think it was released in February. It was huge in the UK, speaking about ecosystem services and, the value of nature from an economic lens. And maybe we can go more into the controversy of it in a bit, but yeah, what are your views on that? And how did you come to use that as a path to reach people?
Yeah, well, first I have to say, Bella, that when I was your age, I had no idea about economic reviews or ecosystem services. So I'm very impressed about you and your generation, your buddies who are real leaders and activists. So I thank you for that. And services is something, ecosystem services was a concept that was developed to explain all these things that we get from nature for free, right? The oxygen we breathe, for example, is a service from nature. It's produced mostly by microbes and algae in the ocean, more than half of it. So without all these microbes in the ocean, every other breath we take wouldn't be there. Everything that we eat, all the food that we eat, comes from animals or plants. We need nature for that. The clean water that we drink, hopefully, has been filtered by a native forest. Right? The rain that waters our crops in the American continent is mostly produced by the Amazon forest. In Africa is by the Congo forest. So there are all these things that nature gives us that are absolutely essential for our survival. All these things that we depend on, depend on the work of other species, and we cannot recreate this. We cannot recreate all this oxygen. We cannot filter all the water that we drink. We cannot, replace bees to pollinate our crops. So without nature, there will be no us. This is why, one way to look at it is to look at the ecosystem services. If you want to be very selfish, right? I need nature because I want to continue living and I want to live in a beautiful, wonderful place. So that's why ecosystem services are such an important concept.
Yeah, it's an interesting narrative in a way because it's so important, the services that nature does provide, but also seeing nature through an economic lens. As you say, it is sort of inherently selfish to see nature as something for us rather than us as part of that sphere of that web, really.
Can I ask you a question, Bella? Can I reverse role for 1 second? How do you explain to people why we need nature?
I think actually nature is, rather than nature being there for us, rather than us needing it, there's an intrinsic value in a way. And I think we should respect it for that. And it's very multifaceted. There's that. And then the second thing I think is the value it brings us, not economically, but as humans, because obviously living on a planet without nature is not viable. But let's say we did, hypothetically. Imagine waking up on a planet without that abundance of biodiversity, without being able to go and hear birds outside or see a sunset or go swimming, see coral reefs, for example. I think that's unimaginable, and it's a world I wouldn't, and I think most people wouldn't want to live in. And part of this whole narrative thing we speak about is sort of elusive. Everyone throws around this buzzword. We need a new narrative. And I really like to speak to you because we're already over, but I think we have to discuss this because it's so important what our narrative is at the moment and how we can get to this new narrative, this new story for humanity where everyone sees nature as something with an inherent value, and that inherent value, that love of nature is at the heart of everything we do, including the economy, including government, and all businesses and companies.
Well, I think you have articulated it so well, Bella. I don't have much to add, but it's already clear that if just for selfish reasons, we need nature. Without nature, we would be dead, right? But if we come to the love, if we come to the spiritual, the intrinsic value that you mentioned, you might be a religious person that believes that the 9 million species of plants and animals on Earth are part of God's creation. Or you could be a scientist who believes that diversity is process of an evolutionary process that is just astounding. It's really amazing. Or you could be, and there are a few of these physical theoretical physicists who believe that our universe is a computer simulation, right? It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what you believe in. The truth is that life on Earth is a miracle. It is an absolute miracle. It is the only place with life in the known universe. And we are looking for the presence of all microbes in Mars. We are looking for life in the deep oceans of the moons of Jupiter and Saturn. But we have it here. We have life everywhere, from microbes that live in the highest clouds to microbes that live 4 kilometers deep into the rock, with this amazing diversity of forests, wetlands, grasslands, even our parks in the cities, with animals as small as the water bear to elephants and tigers, panda bears, so many species of birds, and the fishes in the ocean, the coral reefs and the whales and the dolphins. It is an absolute miracle. And if you are religious, this is part of God's creation. You don't want, if you love God, you don't want to destroy his creation. If you're a scientist, you should be absolutely marveled, in wonder, in continuous. That's what happens to me. I'm in continuous awe and wonder by the diversity, the complexity. We have all these millions of plants of species interacting together, and it works. It's incredible. Why are we destroying this? Every species has an intrinsic right to exist. They are part of this universe like we are. We have no right whatsoever to jeopardize their survival. So we need to become a better citizen of our planet. Not only because of the respect that we owe to these species, because they produce everything we need to survive. We are absolutely helpless without them. But also we need this sense of humility that you mentioned, that we are not on top of creation. We are a part of it. And we are just one of these 9 million species of plants and animals, and a trillion different types of microbes. And yes, we should become a humble citizen, a humble citizen of this wonderful biosphere we live in.
So if everyone, not on this call, everyone in the world suddenly developed that humility and that reverence for nature, what to you would the ideal world look like, let's say by 2050? Because I think, as creatures of imagination, we need somewhere to move towards. And if we have this vision of the future to move towards, it's helpful to construct the path to get there. So for you, what would that world be like?
2050, it's a world where you and I, well, you, I don't know if I'll be around, but it's a world where you and your friends will be very happy to live in, a world where the global warming has stopped and it started to reverse, where nature is growing, where we have reversed our abuse of all these other creatures on the planet, where we take less resources to produce the food that we have, where we understand that we only have one planet and we have to live within these limits. A world where we produce the same amount of food with less resources. A world where our kids are going to have a healthier future, where the water is cleaner again, where plastic pollution doesn't exist, where our economy is completely carbon neutral. We are not releasing spewing all these fumes into the atmosphere. It's a clean, healthy, richer world. That's the world that I am fighting for to see, or at least so you can see it in 2050.
Yeah, and I'm very grateful, and I think everyone of my age, in fact, every human should be grateful for the work you're doing. And I think we need to get to a place where we don't see people as activists or environmentalists, but instead, everyone recognizes that everyone needs to mobilize and do their own bit. And on that note, I think, we've talked sort of about the hypothetical, what we want the future to look like. And I think I'm just going to say to everyone, this is being hosted by Reserva. And I think it would be amazing if anyone wanted to get involved with Reserva, with the 1 million letters campaign shown at the beginning. And just, Enric, I'd love for you to, use this as an opportunity to speak of any projects you want people to get involved with, or perhaps your book, because I got your book last week and I'm in the middle of it right now. And I think if you want to give a shout out to your book, do it.
Oh, you are very sweet. I hope you enjoy the book. So yeah, I wrote a book last year. I published a book called The Nature of Nature. And in this book, I tell stories of how we understood, or how do we discovered the rules of nature. We have 9 million species of plants and animals working together, and it works. It just works. It's beautiful. And even though we are trying to mess up with things. So it's the story of the scientific discovery of how nature works. But then what can we learn from this? And what is the what are the selfish reasons for which we should protect 30% of our planet at least? What are the economic reasons? But also, like you alluded, Bella, what is the moral imperative? Why we should be moral and ethical animals, and care for the rest of life on Earth? And also there is a chapter on the coronavirus at the end, because I think, and I'll stop here, I think this pandemic is the loudest reminder we've had in recent times that we are not apart from nature, but we are a part of nature. And remember that the virus came from a wild animal. The virus jumped from a wild animal to a human. And we've had these infectious diseases in the past. This one is just bigger, and we might have more in the future. And if we continue encroaching upon nature, we're going to have more of these viruses on our doorstep. So if we want to reduce the risk, if we want to prevent future pandemics, future crises, future loss of human life, future economic disaster, nature is our best vaccine. So I hope that you will be able to get the book and read it. At the end, I think you'll be better prepared to understand how you can help.
Yeah, and I think I just want to say to people, I know it's terrifying what we're facing. It's hopeful listening to you speak, but it's terrifying sort of the scale of the crisis. And one of my favorite quotes I've heard from Mary Hagler is, we can be overwhelmed by the scale of the crisis, or we can fall in love with hang on, let me get this right. We can be overwhelmed with the scale and complexity of the crisis, or we can fall in love with the possibility of the future, something along those lines. And I think, we're at this point where right now we could either be paralyzed and we can be apathetic because of fear, or we can recognize that actually we're going to create this amazing new world. We're going to create this amazing new society where we live on the world in a much more conscious and much more ethical way. And I think that's so exciting. And I think it's something everyone on this call is probably already involved in creating. And so I would just say, continue everyone doing what you're doing, get involved if you're not, and continue spreading the message. And thank you so much, Enric, for your work. I'm so grateful for everything you're doing.
Thank you so much, Bella. You are one of the greatest champions for our planet. Thank you for what you're doing too.
Well, thank you to the two of you for such an illuminating conversation. I love that, Enrique, you mentioned that there's an entire universe found underwater, and we often fail to realize that it's microcosmic under there, and that nature is our best vaccine. So that was a wonderful parting words. And thank you, Bella, for those wonderful questions. So I'm sure that we're all feeling very hopeful after this conversation. So if you all have any questions, please do make sure to drop them in the chat so that they can be answered. But for now, let's move on to our next component, where we will be joined by National Geographic explorer, TV presenter, and wildlife filmmaker, Malaika Vaz. But let me just share my screen so we can see. Okay. Malaika is a world-renowned storyteller. She hosts, directs, and produces documentaries on the environment and wildlife conservation for television networks such as Nat Geo Wild, Discovery Channel, Animal Planet, and Al Jazeera. I'd like to mention that it is also Malaika's birthday today, so please do drop her a happy birthday message in the chat. Malika, I'd like to let you speak to your experiences as a young storyteller, so please do go ahead. Thank you for being here.
Hi, Shruti. Thank you so much for that really, really kind introduction. And I'm so excited to be here today. I was just listening to the last two conversations, and there is so much hope and positivity for the year ahead. I think 2021 has definitely been a wake-up call in a sense. What I'd like to say, starting off is that I think more than anything, this year has been polarizing. It has been divisive at times, and it's been a scary year for a lot of people. But stories have brought us together. Stories have helped us to feel connected to each other. And I think that at this particular time, for me as a filmmaker, I'm most excited about the power of young people telling their own stories from different parts of the world. So I'd like to tell you about a couple of things that I think about when I make a documentary. But before that, I'd love to tell you about why I got into this. Growing up, I watched so many documentaries online and on television. And I think the thing that always struck me was that you would see this beautiful image of a whale going through the ocean. But if you actually zoom out, if you were there as a human being filming it, you would see that, there's probably a little bit of garbage somewhere in the ocean. There's probably also an illegal fishing vessel. And then if you zoom out a bit more, you might potentially see a scientist doing some pioneering work. And then if you zoom out even more, you would see a community member or a bunch of people who live right next to that ocean ecosystem who are working incredibly hard to protect that wildlife. But so often as audiences, we just see the whale or we just see the animal on camera. And I think that with this generation, it really needs to change. So let me just take you through a quick little bit of an introduction I have right here. I'm just going to share my screen with you. Hold on. There we go. So the first question that I always ask myself with any documentary is, what does this documentary do? I think we are living through an extinction crisis. It is a difficult time for our planet. And we do not have the liberty anymore to tell stories that don't have a very direct conservation goal. Every single story that we tell today needs to have an impact goal. It needs to have a reason for its very existence. For the last couple of years, I've been working on a documentary on the illegal trade in manta rays across Southeast Asia. And when we first started out, I was just most taken away by the fact that there wasn't any research done on this subject. And these animals that are so beautiful weren't protected in our waters just because they are murky. These waters, as you can see in this picture, I mean, if you went diving, you wouldn't see a manta ray. But that doesn't mean the biodiversity that lives in this water is any less worthy of protection. So my team and I always had this goal of, we need to get a national campaign going to protect these animals, to have a scientific research database of these animals, and eventually to get them the policy protection that we require. And it has been a really challenging process over the last couple of years, but we've had success as well. And most recently, we finished the first national database of manta ray landings, manta ray killings all across the Indian coastlines. All of the blue areas that you can see on this map were completely surveyed, and what we found was quite shocking. But for me as a filmmaker, I think what really struck me was that we couldn't have done this without the scientists. I mean, you need the storytelling to draw people in, but without this scientific research that you can see right here, without the people who are out there actually collecting that data, without that partnership between storytelling and science, the policy impact is not possible. But now that we've got both in place, we're aiming to get these animals protected under India's Wildlife Protection Act, and fingers crossed for that in 2021. The second question that I always ask myself as a filmmaker is, what does something make me feel when I watch it? And what do I want my audiences to feel when they watch a documentary? So recently I was working on this film for kids with the BBC, and it focused on the subject of elephant tourism and how elephant trafficking is being facilitated by a lot of actions of people like us, people who go on vacations and ride elephants in different parts of the world. And what struck me is that, these animals, these elephants that I'm standing right next to in this picture, some of them have spent up to 50 years in captivity. These are social beings. They need to be in the wild. That's where they belong. But many of them have spent 50 years locked inside a city. And how do you bring that sense of empathy for an issue that is so normalized? You kind of take it back to the grassroots. So we went to the grassroots, which was basically the forest in the Western Ghats where these animals actually are born. And I really wanted to show audiences that this is where it begins. And, just like we are family beings, elephants are too, and they deserve to have that wild existence. So I think really striking a chord on a human level, on an empathetic level, and also on an adorable level with these tiny little elephants is really, really important. And hopefully the film has been out for the last month or so, and we've had a really, really good response in different parts of the world from young people who said that, we watched this documentary and there's no way I'm ever going to ride an elephant again. We refuse to ride elephants, and we're going to go out there and educate our friends and our families and people we know at school. And for me, that is a sign of hope that, stories can connect us, stories can illuminate, and sometimes they can expose even things that we normalize. I mean, I've been one of those people who has ridden an elephant on a vacation, but I think that rather than guilting people, we can show them that they can be a part of the solution. Having a bit of an issue with skipping with slides. Can you see it, Shruti?
Malika, I still see the two baby elephants. Is that the screen that you were? Oh, you skipped it. Okay, perfectly. We're on to the next one. Okay.
And then the final question is audience, because I think that everything we do, we have to target it to a specific audience. And one of the most interesting insights for me as a filmmaker was that you don't always have to have a massive audience. Sometimes it's great to have a film that reaches out to millions of people on television or online. But sometimes the most impactful films are films that reach out to one person or three people who are in government or three people in a position of power to make a difference. So if you're a young storyteller out there, remember that you have to think impact first. You have to think story first. And once you realize what change you'd like to make in the world, think about who can help you make that change and direct that film for that audience, even if that's 5 people or if that's 5 million. I think either way, whether that's both of them can be ambitious, and it's just about figuring that out and just kind of following through. And lastly, I'd like to say that, in conclusion, over the last 5 years, I've had the privilege to work with amazing people on shoots and film really, really cool stories of inspiring conservation leaders. And a lot of this has been for television, like for Nat Geo, for Discovery, or Al Jazeera. But for me, my biggest victory was when we made this TV series on big cats and the communities that protect them. And someone from this community actually called me and said, hey, we watched the film on television, and for the longest time we've had filmmakers here telling stories about the tigers and the lions and the leopards, but for the first time we actually saw our story represented on camera. We saw the story of the locals, like people like us who actually are protecting wildlife, and it was a positive story. So thank you for that. And for me, that's when it kind of, the dots connected. That's what it's about. It's about not just empowering communities, because so many of them are already empowered, but just showing the world that there are people out there who are protecting wildlife, and we need to shine a spotlight on them while we can. So that's my, little bit for the day. I think it's been really, really exciting to see all of the other conversations. And I'm so excited that we're having these virtually right now. I think the world needs connection, it needs stories, and it needs people like the Reserva Youth Council, people who are young out there and who are protecting the natural world. I think, one of the things that always strikes me about storytelling is that it's not always about making a film or writing a book or doing a piece of art. Sometimes storytelling is also just going out there and doing some action. And I think being a part of the Reserva Youth Council for me is really special, because to me, it represents people across the world coming out of their, personal bubbles, supporting Indigenous communities and protecting the wild, because that's all we have right now. And we're going to do this. I am so hopeful about the future.
Thank you so much, Malika. That was such a powerful statement and so well said. These are very unique experiences that you've had, and it's really great that you're able to communicate these with us through your wildlife filmmaking. And we're very lucky to hear about it from you, and happy birthday once again. Everyone, please do save some of your questions for Malika. She will be returning on the panel later. But to move on to part 3 of the session, we are so honored to welcome Dr. Paula Kahumbu. Dr. Paula Kahumbu is a multi-award-winning Kenyan wildlife conservationist and CEO of the Wildlife Direct. The organization has become the largest wildlife blogging site in Africa and has covered a diverse array of conservation issues, from protecting chimpanzees in Sierra Leone to African painted dogs in Zimbabwe. She leads the highly successful Hands Off Our Elephants campaign with the First Lady of the Republic of Kenya, Margaret Kenyatta, who aims to restore Kenyan leadership in elephant conservation. Paula has won many awards for her advocacy, such as the Whitley Award and the National Geographic Howard Buffett Award. If you have any questions for Paula throughout, please do drop them in the chat. But Paula, take it away. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much. And happy birthday, Malika. I hope everyone says happy birthday. Do a clap or something. Use the reactions button. Thank you so much for this. I am so thrilled to be part of this event. I'm an ecologist. I studied elephants because I really thought people were very difficult to deal with. And I just wanted to hang out with charismatic, amazing animals. And that's what I started doing. And I realized very quickly in my career that the animals we love and the animals we are so privileged to study are disappearing. And we can't afford to just be scientists. We've got to be activists. Can I have the first slide, please? So I'm going to tell you about the project I'm working on. We started off doing many of the things that Shruti just mentioned, using Wildlife Direct as a platform for storytelling for people from all across Africa, where we are losing wildlife because it's very difficult to raise money for wildlife. So Wildlife Direct started off as an amazing platform to support conservationists across the continent. Next slide. But we very quickly realized that one of the biggest challenges we had in the continent was that there were common problems happening in many countries and everybody trying to do things individually on their own. We realized that the stories that were emerging from our platform were stories that we needed to amplify, and we amplify them through campaigns. Our mission is to connect people to nature and wildlife so that they will treasure it and act to save it. And we say treasure, not value, because we don't want to put dollar signs on these amazing, iconic animals. We want people to treasure them the way that you treasure something that may not be cashable, but it's in your heart, it's in your mind, it's in your cells, it's in your DNA. You're never going to give up on elephants because you treasure them. Next slide, please. In earlier this decade, in 2012, 2013, we saw a massive slaughter of elephants across Africa after 4 African countries sold their ivory to China and Japan. We saw 80% almost of Tanzania's elephants slaughtered. And in Kenya, we could see it was happening as well. In fact, just last week, the IUCN declared African elephants endangered and African forest elephants critically endangered. And this is in large part due to the massive slaughter of elephants for their ivory, like this amazing bull killed in Masai Mara. The sad thing about elephants, these are extraordinary animals that are intelligent. They think, they communicate, they play jokes on each other. They also mourn their dead. And when an elephant is killed, the others try to help. And that puts many, many elephants in danger. In some countries, the slaughter was so embarrassing because Africa went along with the idea of selling ivory to these countries, even though they knew it was risky. But in Kenya, we realized that we were going to face a mountain of a problem. And so as soon as we started seeing poaching levels rise, we challenged our government and we demanded that the government take action. What we realized is that it's not possible just to use science. We needed very strong communication. We worked with a PR company to help us communicate effectively to win the hearts and minds of all Kenyans, and especially the leadership, as Shruti said, the Kenyan First Lady. Next slide. So we launched a campaign called Hands Off Our Elephants. And then we said they are our elephants. You know, for the longest time, elephants have been used on the logos of many international companies, like World Wildlife Fund has used elephants in much of their fundraising. So has African Wildlife Foundation used them in their logos, and many, many companies use African elephants. But actually, Africans didn't have that same relationship. And we wanted to take back these animals as ours. So this campaign was really around the story of this particular family of elephants. The matriarch in this picture, her name is Kumquat. She's a member of a family of the QBs. Every elephant in Amboseli is named after the letter of the alphabet. These are the Qs. Behind her is her daughter, Quay, and there's little Q-Tip, is the baby down there. This family was just extraordinary. They were slaughtered. The entire family was slaughtered for their ivory, except Kwanzaa, the tiny baby who didn't have tusks. The poachers weren't going to waste a bullet on that little baby. Luckily, Kwanzaa was rescued and she has now gone back to the wild. But the story of Kumquat and her family and the court case that emerged from there, we actually went after the criminals, not just that killed this family, but that slaughtered many, many elephants. And Wildlife Direct became very famous as an organization that was really bold, went after the bad guys and sought to have them, you know, compelled to prison. This campaign was so successful that Kenya's poaching crisis was averted. The poaching today has declined by 99%. So that is how storytelling can have huge power. We realized that, and we went on to the next stage. So next slide, please. We used our campaign to mobilize hearts and minds of people, to get people out of their homes, off their TVs, and into the streets to march and demand for justice for our animals. We had this campaign, Hands Off Our Elephants, and we said, we're going to fight for them. You know, if you can see the posters there saying, you know, fight back, and we want justice for our wildlife. We ran these public demonstrations in the streets for several years running. And the last one, we had over 4,000 people marching on the streets of Nairobi. This was stuff that couldn't be ignored. You can see on the left-hand corner of this photograph, you can see a man in a uniform. That's the Kenya Wildlife Service, who actually joined in and actually became partners in the whole campaign. So while initially the campaign was really tough, government felt we were attacking them, actually they realized very quickly this campaign was so powerful that when they were on board with us, we were able to change the laws, we were able to change the process in the courts, we were able to send a message to all Kenyans that if you touch our elephants, we're coming for you, your life is in danger. And that's why poaching went down. Next slide. But even though poaching has gone down by 99%, it doesn't mean that elephants are safe. In fact, elephants in Africa and in Asia require large tracts of land, and this land is being converted for other uses, in this case, agriculture. Next slide. And this is the same landscape where we have the same Amboseli elephants, some of the most famous elephants in the world. And this is what is happening. Land is being converted to, in this case, avocado farming. And this is another campaign that we've now recently just launched, because we realized that our storytelling shouldn't just end. We need to maintain our storytelling and secure all the land that is required for these animals. What's happening right now is an incredible destruction of habitat and landscapes, and this affects the connectivity of our protected areas. You know, while we're growing avocados to sell to Europe so that people can enjoy avocado on toast, we could actually end up causing our own elephants to starve to death because they cannot move across their landscape from the springs in Amboseli to the mountains where they get their food. Next slide. The storytelling is so important because of what's happening in the country. Part of the clash for wildlife is that there's development and there's conservation, and people see these as two opposing areas. And of course, when we do development, people think, well, development is good. Farming is great. It creates jobs, it creates food security, but actually it causes more conflict. And what we're seeing is many, many people being injured or killed by elephants, lions, and other species. And as a result, people are retaliating against these animals. In this case, people killed an elephant. The tragedy here is that the media tends to spotlight these kinds of stories. So that means that our people in Africa, the stories that they hear about are these stories about how dangerous elephants and lions and leopards and hyenas are. They don't hear about how magnificent they are, how iconic they are, how adorable, how intelligent, how playful they are. They hear about how dangerous they are. And this is because although Africa has been the home for thousands of wildlife documentaries made by big organizations, including National Geographic, Discovery, Disney, you name them, BBC, those films are not destined for African markets. And so you can't see them on domestic television in Africa unless you're very wealthy and you can afford to stream Netflix or Disney, Disney Plus and that kind of thing. Next slide. So we turned around and we said, we're going to change this narrative. It's not just what's in the newspapers, it's actually what's happening on the ground as well. People are affected by the human-wildlife conflict. This is a lioness who was killed just south of Nairobi National Park. In this area, lions were hunting livestock just outside of the park. The local community killed it. This female and her entire family, including her cubs. The tragedy of this photograph is that the schools in the area were closed so that children could come and see their very first lion. This is how we are educating our children in Africa. And this photograph really caused me such heartbreak that we had to do something. Next slide. Next slide. We had to do something to address the fact that a lot of people feel like things are hopeless. We needed to find the positive stories, our own stories. We tried showing the stories that were made by foreigners about our own wildlife, and we found that Kenyans started to challenge, how come there are no Africans in these stories? So we looked for our own local stories. So here's a young man, Richard Turere, a 13-year-old boy who actually solved that problem of the lions south of the Nairobi National Park. Next slide. He invented an amazing flashing light system. He's now 18 years old, but that earlier photograph was when he was 13. And Richard invented a beautiful flashing light system that helped his father to stop the predation on his cattle, sorry. And this flashing light system it's called Lion Lights. It's now being used all across Africa and even in some places in Asia and South America. Next slide. Richard's invention was so interesting that at 13, he was invited to speak at TED in Los Angeles. It's the first time this little boy who was he was a herder who went to a local school. His story was so inspiring, not just to the local people, but to the whole world. And these are the stories that we need to amplify. Next slide. So we work with children and young people across our country. We listen to them, we ask them, what do they want and how can we help? Next slide. We do it in urban areas, we do it in rural areas, we do it in schools, in communities. We go wherever the children are and we work with them through our programs in order to understand what are the challenges, what are the pain points people are experiencing and what can we do to help them. Next slide. There are loads of opportunities in my country. So we did all kinds of things, all kinds of experiments, including training local people how to develop tools to combat human-wildlife conflict. Like in this case, these local people were learning how to use technology, including 3D printers, to design equipment to keep elephants out of their farms. Next slide. And what we're trying to do is to create agency that local people realize that they have the power, right? We want to get away from this problem of people feel despondent, that the problem is too big and they have no power. And we feel that storytelling is the most powerful way to do this. Our goal is to catalyze an African wildlife positive narrative through stories, books, songs, plays, art, and wildlife filmmaking, which is what I do. And the reason why this is so critical is because the current narrative is out of date and it's actually an obstacle. The current narrative is that the only people who care about wildlife are people from overseas, foreigners, international scientists, expatriates, or white Kenyans. And this is a narrative that exists all across Africa. So we wanted to amplify pride about our wildlife and our heritage and our culture. We want to mainstream this narrative in the media. And this is urgent. We need to do this urgently in order to catalyze our government and our people into action. Next slide. So we started a TV series called Wildlife Warriors. It's not my first TV series, but it's the most successful so far. Next slide. Wildlife Warriors is a very cool series. It's intentional in several ways. We're telling stories about our own people, but by our own people. So this is my crew. I'll start from the right-hand side. That's Steve. He's a local cameraman who had never filmed wildlife before he started working with me. Evod is wearing the white shirt. Evod is actually from Rwanda, and he is a second cameraman who also had never filmed wildlife. And we had some very entertaining episodes filming dangerous creatures with these two guys who are incredibly courageous. And Laban on the left, who is our sound guy. So together we have crisscrossed my country, making now 26 episodes of Wildlife Warriors. Next slide. Our TV series shines a light on Kenyan conservation heroes at the front line. Everybody from this young lady in the very top left, Brenda, who studies guinea fowl, a very common bird, but whose episode really struck the hearts and minds of Kenyans because they saw a young girl who grew up in a village that was just like any other village, whose parents were pushing her to do medicine, but she actually, all she wanted to do is study birds. She now works for the Max Planck Institute. She's just gotten her master's degree and starting her PhD. She is already published in Science and Nature. So this is a great story of somebody who comes from a background that is typical of many Africans and is making it in the height of science. All of the heroes of our season 1 are in this photograph. These are amazing, amazing people. And I urge you all to have a look at the series. It's on YouTube under just search Wildlife Warriors and you'll get to watch all of these episodes. Each is half an hour long. And all of these people have, not only are they doing great work, but the series shined a light on them, got them new funding, new opportunities, training, equipment, you name it. It's been so exciting, the impact of the series on all of these heroes and heroines. Next slide. So the idea that we have is to tell the stories of individuals. This is Paul, he's a bat scientist and he's in season 2, which hasn't yet come out. And what we wanted to show people is these are incredible animals that we are actually afraid of. We have loads of cultural stories about how terrible bats are and people try to kill bats. And here's a guy who adores bats. And in fact, in our episode on bats, we worked with Rodrigo Medellin, who is one of the Nat Geo explorers who had come to Kenya. And we did this amazing, amazing episode filming with both of them and a bunch of students. Next slide. So what we're doing is breaking negative stories. And we're also showing young people a pathway to become explorers, scientists, conservationists, a pathway that doesn't exist and is not taught in school. And this is matched with a program we have in school called Wildlife Warriors Kids. And this is a super exciting program that I'm going to tell you about next. So next slide. So we have Wildlife Warriors Kids in schools across our country in the remotest corners you can imagine. Some of these schools are literally like 2 days drive away from the capital city. We make sure that every single school has a computer, they have access to our films, they have lesson plans for the teachers, books and activities that the kids can do around every single episode. And we challenge all these kids to do programs and projects in their schools and show us what they're doing so that they can win a place on our special expeditions. Next slide. So the kids receive a newsletter, they get books in their schools. You know, these are schools in some places where they don't even have desks, like they're really, really poor. These are government schools. So we're so excited that we can reach these amazing teachers and all their children. We currently have about 3,000 children in this program. Next slide. We take the kids out to the field. We take them on field trips and expeditions. We show them all kinds of things. We work with volunteers and staff at Wildlife Direct to make this possible. Next slide. And we take them on citizen science events. Now, these kids, some of them are like 8 years old. The youngest we had was 6. They get to meet scientists from international universities like Dan Rubenstein from Princeton. And I think this has a huge impact. When we ask the kids afterwards, what was the best thing about this 2-day trip counting zebras, they said it was meeting the international students. Why? Because it gives these kids a chance to believe that they could actually become international scientists themselves. And they ask us, so what do we need to do? What subjects do we need to take? And how are we going to pass the exams to reach that level? Next slide. So kids learn from local scientists as well. In this case, this is the Grevy zebra scientist who's showing them how the software works to read the stripes on every single zebra. Next slide. And the kids get to do expeditions with us. Every year, we take about 120 children on an expedition. They learn how to camp for the first time. Children from all over the country get together, and they have to share, learn, and work together in a cooperative way. So this is just the beginning of the Wildlife Warriors Kids program. We've just received an amazing piece of land, 30 acres of wilderness, for our children to have their own headquarters where they'll be doing their own research, they'll have their own campgrounds. And I think it's going to be a real game changer. It's the first project of its kind in Africa. Next slide. And on this piece of 30 acres of land, the children will be doing their own science, collecting their own specimens, doing their own studies, journaling, doing art, music. I mean, it's unbelievable how creative these kids become. Next slide. They get to meet not only scientists, but they get to meet other kinds of heroes like storytellers. This is a young man who is one of Kenya's storytellers. He's a photographer and a filmmaker. So the kids get to do their own storytelling as well. Next slide. His name is Tony Wild, if anybody wants to look him up. And they also get to meet rangers and learn about the life of rangers and go out on patrol. And I have to say, of all the people we introduced kids to, the one that they were most impressed with was the ranger. Next slide. And we always are asked, so how do we know, does this really work? Well, this school is in northern Kenya in a very desert area called Darachabasa. It is an extremely miserable place. You can see some of these kids don't even have shoes. The kids in this school are not wealthy, but they adopted they adopted an ostrich, which was orphaned. And every day, this ostrich comes to school with one of the boys, and all the children bring out their break boxes and they feed this ostrich, and it walks back home with the boy every single day. And this is what these children did was they sent us this photograph to show us that they are now looking after these animals. In the past, their parents wouldn't have hesitated killing this ostrich and just eating it. In the last couple of months, I saw they had also rescued a gazelle whose mother had been killed by a lion, and they brought that gazelle back to the Kenya Wildlife Service, and it was released back into the wild. Next slide. So this is how you all can reach me. I'd really love to hear from anyone who's excited about what I've just been talking about. I always go on for too long, but I really hope we have a couple of minutes to show the sizzle reel of season 2 of Wildlife Warriors. Kali, do we have time to show it?
Just give me 1 minute. I'm going to bring it up. I think we've got just time to show it. And maybe if there are questions, you could answer them in the chat, since I don't think we have time to answer them.
Okay.
Live. Just 1 moment. Is there actually, Sruthi, is there a question that you can bring up while I'm pulling up the video?
Yes. So, Paula, one of the questions that we've received is, dear Paula, thank you so much for your very important, inspiring work. Do you still have plans to expand your work in filmmaking, education, or outreach in other parts of Africa?
Oh, that is a fantastic question. Thank you for that. Absolutely. The only reason why we didn't film season 2 outside of Kenya was because of COVID. We weren't able to travel, but actually our plans were to go to Uganda, Tanzania, Rwanda, Ethiopia, Mozambique, and South Africa. Those are all still on the list, and the plan is to broadcast our show in those countries as well. So in Kenya, Wildlife Warriors has already reached 51% of our population, and we've also broadcasted into 26 African countries, and all of the countries have said to us, we'd love to have content from our own countries, because they recognize the importance of the audience seeing themselves, just what Malaika said. The impact and the power of these stories is when people can see themselves in the stories. So absolutely, yes. And I hope we can do it literally in the next season, season 3, which we'll be filming towards the end of this year and early next year. Thank you for that.
That's absolutely incredible. Thank you, Paula. Okay, your video is starting.
Oh, I don't know what's happened to the sound.
Sorry about that. I just have to click, I have to click sound. Hold on just a moment. There we go. All right, let me know if you can hear this.
We're on our way to Kanika Island. This time, we're looking for pombo, dolphins. In the northern reaches of the Kenyan coast are over 60 islands. This is the Lamu Archipelago. I've just arrived in Olpejada Conservancy.
If you closely look at them, you can see those prehistoric attributes.
She's so big. Oh, she's beautiful. Warrior's favorite scratch is behind her ears.
Ram, come here. Boy, good boy, come on, boy.
Even in the safest of sanctuaries, life as a lion is still tough.
So we've been tracking lions this morning, and these footprints are going to lead us to exactly where this lion made this kill.
Wow, there are so many. While it's quite sad that a giraffe has died today, its death has led to the renewal of more life. Less than a kilometer away is one of the most diverse ecosystems on Earth, the coral reef.
They're such magical places to find, and that's why it's so important that I want to conserve this area.
If we're going to save Africa's wildlife, we need many more warriors.
Well, I hope that really helps to illustrate the what we're trying to do, the people that we're involving in this storytelling. And I hope that we get the kind of transformation. I've seen quite a few questions asking about, impact. And I think storytelling can transform us because one story can make you change your behavior. And I'll just give you a very simple example. My Octopus Teacher. If you haven't watched it, you've got to watch it. It's on Netflix right now. My Octopus Teacher is a lovely story about a man and his relationship with an octopus. Everyone I know who's watched it has said they will never eat octopus again. That is the power of storytelling. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Paula. We absolutely love your charisma and your passion. This is very inspirational, and I'm sure all of us will have some key takeaways from everything you just told us. So thank you so much. And now that we are running out of time, so we are going to move straight into our youth storytelling panel. This next component is going to be super exciting. We'll be talking about young people and their experiences with youth storytelling. So Malaika, I would like you to very briefly introduce yourself. We'll start with you since we already met you, just a very quick reintroduction for those who might not have been here, and then we will move on to Selena. So.
Yeah, thanks, Shruti. My name's Malaika, and I'm a wildlife presenter and filmmaker. My work focuses on documenting the human footprint on our planet. And the medium that I choose usually is television, but also digital media. And I am so excited about the power of telling community-led stories of conservation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Malaika. Okay, Selena. So I will just give a quick overview. Selena Chen is a 22-year-old intersectional wildlife conservationist, combining her roles as a photojournalist, ecologist, and storyteller to help protect biodiversity in the age of the Anthropocene. Selena, thank you so much for being here. If you'd like to introduce a little bit more about your work, and after that, we can move on to Amelia.
Sure, thank you for that wonderful introduction, Sruthi. Well, you kind of covered it all, but mostly I try to tell stories about conservation issues with my background in ecology and kind of employing ecological thinking into how we tackle environmental issues. And I'm based in London, and I'm really passionate about the overlap between wildlife conservation and environmentalism with the empowerment of women and girls globally, as well as our efforts to achieve racial justice and anti-racism work.
Thank you, Selena. That was wonderful. And we can now move on to Amelia. Amelia is a biologist whose life goal is to spread awareness on the importance of biodiversity and conservation. She is a co-founder of La Neblina. Amelia, if you could please introduce yourself and tell us more about La Neblina.
Hi everyone. Yeah, I'm very excited to be here. Neblina is a project that we started with 2 other girls, and we want to connect, be the bond between conservation and other areas, because conservation can be related with everything, with laws, with art, and we want to spread that thing, and we want to destroy the barrier between science and society that we have perceived in Ecuador. And we want to protect all the ecosystems of our country because it's awesome, and I hope you can come to visit one time.
Thank you, Amelia. Okay, wonderful. Well, we can get into one of our questions now. So Malaika, why don't we start with you? Could you speak to what do you think is one of the most important components of storytelling? Would that be imbuing people with maybe a sense of hope? Would it be telling the most accurate story? Or what do you think is the most important message to push in terms of your storytelling?
I think that, right now we need different kinds of stories. It's really important that we don't tell the same uniform narrative, or at least that we don't feel like we have to talk about the same things in the same ways. For me personally, the most important component of storytelling is helping audiences feel a sense of urgency. I think for the longest time we've had hope. Everyone feels a sense of hope. Most privileged circles feel a sense of hope. We've had the privilege to feel that. And hope is something that we hear about in literally most conversations, in articles, in books, on television. But for the most part, when it comes to action, we always feel like someone else is going to do it. And we don't really understand the gravity of the fact that we have to act together right now. So I think that, kind of driving the point of urgency is really important, but not in a scary way, not in a way that is antagonistic in any way to anyone, but in a way that is solutions focused. And I think even if it's not, as exciting from an editorial standpoint, sometimes in my documentaries, we very explicitly mention solutions. We very explicitly talk about things that people can actually do in their lives, that people in power can do, that governments can do to change things around. And I think that if we call out issues, but also provide the solutions, people will feel like, hey, we're a part of this, and we only have a certain amount of time to act, but we can be a part of this, and these are the ways that we actually can. So I think that that combination of providing people with a sense of urgency and also having these tactical, logical solutions that everyone can do and people in power can do is important.
Beautifully said. Thank you for that, Malaika. So if we can maybe shift the gear now to Selena, you are a photographer. So can you relate to what Malaika said about conveying a sense of hope, but also urgency through your photography?
Absolutely, yeah. And it's a similar approach of trying to tell the same story and trying to convey the strong message of urgency, of hope, but also suggesting solutions and actions, and just trying to do that with still images rather than moving, which I guess can be, I see it as a little element of a challenge, But yeah, it's absolutely a really important component of photography. But one of the things that I find the most important component of storytelling, especially with photography, when you don't have the audio or ability to, explicitly state what you're trying to convey with an image, is using visual storytelling to make people ask questions and question themselves. Paula, earlier, she mentioned My Octopus Teacher. One of the reasons why that was so profoundly affecting is because it made us question our relationship with nature and question our perceptions of cephalopods in general. So yeah, I think it's urgency, but also, I guess, more on the philosophical level of, asking ourselves new questions.
Exactly, and it's really interesting to see how different forms or modes of storytelling can bridge these questions and answers together. So if we can now ask Emilia, how has your organization, La Neblina, benefited from the storytelling aspects, and how does storytelling have an impact for you? I know you all had a storytelling workshop, so could you speak more to that?
Yeah, sure. La Neblina is like, the purpose of it is to expose the other sides of conservation in our country and to tell the story, but not to make people to say, you have to think this or you think to think the other thing. We want to present what is the reality and a kind of bit with our perspective, but to make people to get their own ideas. We are now working on a documentary that we filmed in Esmeraldas. That is one of the provinces, is also Chocó area. And we want to make this side of conservation, we saw the social side. We don't want to put bad things of the mining things or the ones that are extractivists, but we want to share that people who is involved in these works are not bad people. And we have to tell the story because it is two sides of conservation, like the bad thing and the good thing. And there is a gray area, and we want to expose this to people to get to know, but they watch our story and then they get their own ideas. So that is why it's so important, storytelling. So you can get your own ideas, you get to dive, and you have this motivation of get to know more information.
Exactly. I like that you mentioned about that duality. That was very helpful and important. So we are getting some questions in the chat that maybe I can ask whoever would like to answer now. So there's one that has popped up multiple times. What do you think is the #1 challenge for youth to tell stories linked to conservation in the 21st century? And anybody who would like to answer can go ahead.
I can jump in on this. So there are the challenges that, the challenges of doing the storytelling, but I think one of the biggest challenges that face youth storytellers is the, I guess, ageism that kind of exists in society, and how the discrediting and, I guess, patronizing of young people and our voices. And when it comes to environmentalism and conservation and climate, we're the ones that are going to be suffering the consequences, and we're really leading the charge. And so trying to break this mentality in wider society of not respecting, I guess, the wisdom of young people, because it's not an aged wisdom, but it's filled, some people say naive, it's filled with naivety, but in fact, I find that is where hope comes from. That is where positivity and optimism and ultimately ambition, unrivaled ambition, comes from.
That was so well said. And I think people tend to think that youth maybe don't have that level of credibility, but I think we do. From our maybe less life experience, we have this, sense to move forward and not having a cynicism. So that's a really, really great point that you made. Malaika or Emilia, any follow-ups to this point?
I love what you said about, how youth have this ambition. Selena, I think that's a really powerful point, because I think given the challenges that we have up ahead, we definitely need that sense of we've got this ambition. And I think that young people definitely have that. What I'd like to add to that is that I think another one of the challenges that young people face is often finding those platforms, right? I know that as a filmmaker, sometimes you can be making incredible documentaries, but being able to actually reach those out and make sure that those reach large audiences sometimes and actually connect with people beyond your family and your circle is one of the biggest challenges of our times. But I also think that the online world has resulted in this changing of the guard, where people can tell stories in ways that are accessible more now than ever before. A 23-year-old, maybe 20 years back, would not be able to tell the stories about the world that they can today. They'd have to find a way to get through to a broadcast network, speak to some media executive, and probably be told that, hey, you can't do this, you've got to wait for another 10 years. But today you can literally put a video online and reach out to millions of people and get those conversations going, even when they're difficult conversations. So I think that while we do have a lot of challenges, and while people don't listen to the youth voice as much as they should, I also think that it's an amazing time, probably the best time in the history of the world, to be a young person telling stories.
That is a super good point that I didn't even think about. Nowadays, it's so much easier, I think, than it was in the past. And gradually we're working towards making a bigger impact as youth and being taken more seriously. So now to switch gears, I'd like to start off asking Emilia, are there any stories that you have told or that you have attempted telling so far or are in the works of it that have had an incredible impact on you? Is there something close to your heart that in terms of storytelling made a big difference? And I will ask this question to the both of you afterwards as well.
Recently, I get to know a woman that is called Yadira, that is from Esmeraldas, when we were filming our documentary. And in Ecuador, we have so conservative mini populations in the rural sites, and getting to hear her story of how she didn't care about the opinion of the rest when they told them that she couldn't do a man's work or she couldn't dedicate to conservation because they need money and they need more resources, and the conservation was not going to be enough for living. And her attitude of she telling me her story of how she just didn't care and she put in action what she thought and given like an example to other girls to follow her lead, that really inspired me, because if she could do that in a very conservative, in a rural place, why we cannot do it the same? Why we cannot not just thinking an idea, but just getting into an action and demonstrating the rest that we are able to do that. And that is also related with youth. Like if we are not listened by the adults, we don't have to get their approval to make actions, because we have a head, we have a hand, and we have the ability to learn. So even if we are not listened, we are going to make them listen with us, because we have the abilities to have great projects and do great things.
Exactly. And so a lot of times you see these stories being told everywhere that are just harrowing and riveting, and they make you feel all sorts of emotions. And what I was thinking about was, Selena, you've taken some really incredible photography that documents illegal wildlife trade. And I know I'm sure this impacted you a lot in terms of your mode of storytelling and how you wanted to, can you speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for bringing that up, because that was going to be my answer to that question. It's an issue that it is really close to my heart, because it, with respect to the illegal wildlife trade, I was specifically looking at live animals that have been traded. So animals that are traded either as pets or in captivity. And it balances both the issue of animal welfare, animal rights, and how we as human beings see ourselves in the world and how we relate to other living organisms, and how we really need to extend the empathy, our reaches of our empathy to other living things. But it also looks at the wider conservation issues, as well as cultural issues, and how photography and photojournalism in general, or just reporting overall in the West, has failed to empathize with the communities that are participating in this trade, particularly, you know, for example, traditional Chinese medicine. And one of the reasons why I have been so drawn to telling stories about that, and I hope to be able to get back to doing that soon, is the fact that, you know, I have Chinese heritage, and I grew up my whole life loving the planet and being really invested in conservation, and feeling that not only was my voice and my community and my perspective not represented in the wider storytelling community about, you know, the East and Southeast Asian perspectives of conservation, but I felt there was an active demonization and, I guess, finger pointing towards certain communities and cultures and traditions. And rather than, you know, same thing, Paula mentioned this as well, it's not just, and also Amelia mentioned this, it's not just a black and white, who's good, who's bad, who's doing the right thing, who's doing the wrong thing. Everybody's coming from this from different places, from different cultural backgrounds, and being able to tell people's stories with empathy and respect. That's much more likely to lead to real lasting conservation action, rather than finger pointing and I guess vilifying of an entire culture. And there's no denying that the actions do have grave environmental consequences. It's just how we're going to go about it, and how we can involve the most number of people in the most, I guess, open way, like calling in rather than calling out, really. Yeah.
That was really interesting. Calling in rather than calling out. That's something I have to take a look at. That's a really interesting concept. Thank you, Selena, because you mentioned that it is and all of you have really mentioned that conservation is not a black and white issue. It's actually very multidimensional, and it really connects these political, economic, business, and even colonial history together, and that's why people across the world do have these complicated relationships with the environment, and you can't just easily, you know, vilify a group and say, you guys are killing these animals, you have no respect for them. There's a lot of, you know, deeper connections with that. Maleka, I know you also had you know, an experience like documenting illegal wildlife trade. Do you have anything to maybe follow up on this topic?
Yeah. So I spent a lot of time documenting the transnational links between illegal wildlife trafficking. So following it through from my country to Myanmar, and then to Hong Kong and Guangzhou. And I did spend a lot of time in the same markets that actually resulted, or at least were the melting pots for a lot of the virus to get, you know, out into the world. And I think while I was making this documentary, it was very easy to say that, you know, this is a community that is responsible for the decimation of wildlife. But I think that as storytellers, we have to go so much deeper. We have to not choose that easy, you know, almost convenient narrative, and really dig below the surface to understand that, you know, there are certain cultural constructs out there that are decimating wildlife, but at the same time, those are constructs that are willing to change. And the next generation of young people who I met in Guangzhou and in Hong Kong, in these very wildlife markets, sometimes the kids who were sitting at the counter while their dads were dealing with ivory and with shark fins, those kids really want to be a part of the next generation that's changing things. And if you alienate them in the kind of stories that we tell, in the narrative that we have out there, then you're alienating an entire generation. But if you have a much more open, accepting narrative, I think, you know, that's when you can make a real difference. And coming back to what I said about solutions, I think, you know, in 2020, I couldn't travel to the places that I was traveling to, like in Guangzhou or Hong Kong, to tell these stories anymore. So I decided to look a bit closer home. And I realized that, you know, this pandemic basically came out of our destruction of the natural world. It came out of habitat being destroyed. It came out of wild animals being taken to places they shouldn't be in. And if you look at it from like a larger ecosystem zoomed out perspective, you realize that, you know, the solutions lie in documenting what the positives are and how you can actually address that. So I worked on this film with Al Jazeera, which was focused on why we need to protect bats, because after the pandemic, people across the world just assume that if you have a bat in your backyard, they're going to give you the virus. But it's actually the opposite. Bats are really useful for agriculture. They're great for ecosystems. They're really helpful for human communities. So we documented this really cool story in Karnataka in India, where an entire conservation reserve was created for a bat. And that's really unique because you have conservation reserves being created for wild animals like tigers or elephants or the big charismatic wildlife. But it's often the smallest of species that can, you know, create such a positive impact in the ecosystem that are really pushed away. And through that documentary, we talked about how protecting habitat is actually the way to prevent future zoonotic diseases. And for me, the most exciting part about that film was realizing that after the conservation reserve was created, it wasn't just the bats that were protected, but leopards came back, other kinds of wildlife came back. And that process of rewilding represents what we need to do. We need to rewild our planet so much more going forward. And I think documenting those stories of hope is really important as well.
Thank you, Malaika. That was so interesting. Exactly. And there's so many stories to be told, and then there's so many new angles to go forward. And I think another big thing is that we need to start engaging and involving other young people to tell stories that may not have initially started out telling stories. And this I can now link to the 1 million letters campaign. So Emilia, would you be able to speak to the 1 million letters campaign and your work around that? Because that is also another very important aspect of getting other young people to tell these stories.
Yeah, I would like to say that all these Neblina project started because we felt so inspired by the opportunity of taking our ideas out of the head and writing them to a leader. So this campaign started because it gives the opportunity of the youth to write their ideas of why nature is important, why it's so like urgent to take care of it, and what are the ideas you have to take care of them, what you do daily, and how do you think that leaders have to act to prevent of having more habitats destroyed. So this campaign was an idea of Reserva and in a joint with the partner Caminga from Ecuador. And yeah, I don't know how, if you want me to talk about more of the campaign or.
Oh, of course, yeah. Please expound as much as you can.
Yeah, so in Ecuador, Caminga started like getting into the schools and having also education to the kids, to approaching them to decide of what is living next to them. Like Reserva is planning to buy this Reserva in Ecuador, and many of the kids doesn't know what they have next to the doors, what frogs, what snakes, what birds they are living with, and getting into these schools and making them see this through other eyes, then they will feel inspired to write the letter and to give them to the leaders. And the idea was to give the letters, and then we can fund money to build this Reserva in Ecuador.
Thank you, Emilia. This is a really important and just indispensable campaign that I think we have, and it's getting people, encouraging people that might not have a tool to speak out or even that much of a desire to speak out. And then when you finally put all of your feelings out in a letter, I think that does a lot for people, not only like emotionally, but also in terms of how they want to tangibly, impact conservation. So Callie has just dropped a link in the chat. So for everyone who would like to go and participate in this, you have a chance. So I now have a logistical question about so you guys are all master storytellers. So anyone who would like to, hop in and take this question can. How do you plan these stories? So what goes behind pushing a message out to young people and the rest of the world? about whatever message you want to push?
I can begin with that question. I love the process of filmmaking. I think I actually am a filmmaker first and a conservationist after. So I'm going to answer that. I think that, for me, I always think about what the final goal is. And like literally before I start writing out the script, I have a little document at the top that talks about exactly what I want to intend and what the timelines are for that. So, 1 week after the film comes out, 2 months after the film comes out, and if it's possible, years after the film comes out. And then I think once you realize what your story is, that research process is really important. Not just from a logistical perspective, but also because you want to make sure that you're not just going into your own biases and leaning into your own biases, but you're actually exploring different perspectives that are out there. And you're engaging with different kinds of ideas that are out there surrounding an issue, whether that is hunting or whether that is the illegal wildlife trade or community-based conservation. It's very easy to kind of just have our own ideas about the world and then make films that only represent that. And that's okay, but I think for me personally, I prefer to have films that represent many different perspectives. And then once you've done that, I think assembling a team that you love working with, a team that's inspiring, a team that kind of complements your skill sets. If you're a young filmmaker and you think that you're a great writer, but you're terrible at cinematography like me, like I'm so bad behind the camera, but I love directing and writing, then find someone who's great at doing that, assemble a tiny team, even if it's just a couple of friends when you begin, and start small. Like you don't have to wait for that enormous budget, or you don't have to wait for that TV commission, or you don't have to wait for someone to tell you to go make a story. Just start somewhere if you can, with even something as simple as a phone camera. And eventually, as that story gets out there, you will find more people echoing that. You will find distribution platforms that will want to have your story out there. And everything will just fall in line, but you just have to start and practice and get better as you go.
That's such a good point, starting small and collaborating with people, and then kind of lighting that fire under yourself to tell these stories if no one has come and approached you. I think that's very, very inspirational to a lot of us that might not yet have a platform or are working towards that. So thank you so much, Malaika. What about Selena? Do you have any thoughts on that, sort of collaborating with other people and pushing these messages forward, something like that? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Malaika really hit the nail on the head with everything. And it's actually so funny because she started off saying that she's a filmmaker first and a conservation second. And almost every talk I give, I always start saying I'm a conservationist first and a photographer second. Because, yeah, I'm driven by the message, and it's really it's whichever medium is the best suited to conveying that message. I will find a way to get into it. And one of the things that I think is lacking in photography that is very, widely accepted in film is collaboration. And that's why I loved what Malaika said. It's so important to collaborate with people, whether they're other photographers, whether they're filmmakers, whether they're scientists. And I come from a research background. I come from I'm doing research in ecology. And so the same idea of researching your story and really understanding it before you start to try and build the narrative, because the narrative will reflect your perspectives, the cultural landscape that you grew up in, and how that informs the way you view certain issues, whether that's and also a really important thing for anybody who wants to go into building these narratives is always ask yourself who is not in the room, who is not being represented, who doesn't have their voice heard, who isn't being represented in this conversation, because more than ever we need the perspectives of those who have been historically either marginalized or actively oppressed and excluded, because those are the voices that we need to inform the solutions going forward. And we will not have just and sustainable environmentalism and conservation action if we don't incorporate all of the voices and I guess stakeholders that we need to, and that comes into storytelling. And And essentially, it also provides a platform for representation. And I think representation is so, so important, whether they're communities, whether they're people, whether they're individuals, whether, if it's women being represented or people from a certain community or country or tradition. Representation speaks so loudly. And that's coming from someone who didn't even realize how powerful it is until I saw myself reflected in the community or industry that I wanted to go into. And so, yeah, I think these are all really important elements to hold in mind.
Indeed, Selena. Yes. Oh, yes, Emilia, please go ahead.
Can I add something? Yeah, I think the process of telling stories have to have a plan, but sometimes I think that being spontaneous is very important. For us in Neblina, we have get as like a community because we have been transparent and we have shown us like we are 3 women that are trying to have time between university and between conservation to tell how it is. So I think that is a very essential part in storytelling, like to be how you are, like try to communicate with sincerity. Sometimes they get confused, and when they communicate with us, they think with like we are a big organization, but we're not. We are 3 persons, and I think that is very important to communicate that transparency, and that will make people feel more like involved. And I think also a very important thing in storytelling is using a common language, because we are scientists, and sometimes scientists like speak in another language with technical things, and then you start like talking about the protein or the things that really people don't understand. And if we want to make our story to get involved people that doesn't really care about nature right now, we need to speak in a language with no barriers, like horizontal. And that thing is like a very important thing when you want to tell a story.
Emilia, that was a perfect point, and I completely agree with really everything that you've said. And I think you're very sort of boots on the ground in terms of how you tell stories. And so can you maybe speak to quite briefly your expedition to the reserve?
Yeah, I was recently at Reserva, and it was amazing. Getting like, I felt that nothing teach you, like no class can teach you like being there in the fields. I even learned how to put my foot in the ground, how to walk in a river, and that doesn't teach you any classroom. You get to know other perspective of the scientists that loves talking about biology, and then the people of community that have that curiosity. And what I really love about this expedition I have was to watch people get interest of the nature through photography. There was a kid called Dario, and he loved photography. Like you saw a spider in your hand, but when you took the picture, you could see the hairs of a spider. And he was so fascinated with all the eyes and the things. So I think that was one of the best things, that you learn so much more in the field and you get to spread your love of nature to others. And that's why it's so important to bond the community with the scientists and speak a common language.
Well, thank you so much to all 3 of you. You guys are extremely eloquent and well-spoken and made some very, very wonderful points that I'll be taking away. And I'm sure the rest of us will be taking away and thinking about for ages after this panel has ended. So since we're running out of time and need to wrap up, can you each one of you give like maybe a very brief 1-line key takeaway that you'd like us all to remember?
I can start. Conservation is an attitude. You don't have to be a big corporation. You don't have to have a title. You can get involved and you can if they don't listen, you can make them listen and you can show them with actions.
Thank you, Amelia.
A piece of advice that I would have loved to hear when I was 18 and I was starting out is that you're never too young. I mean, you can't say it enough times, but you're never too young to go out there, tell the story that you care about, and take on the world and change things forever in a really positive way. So if you have something that, is at the back of your mind right now, or something that you've been thinking about and conspiring about, go out there and make it happen, because that will lead to other exciting opportunities, that will lead to other exciting conversations. And honestly, once you start doing something, we need more wildlife warriors out there. We need more people telling stories that they care about. So come join us.
I think all I can add to that is, in your efforts to tell stories about the natural world, hold on to your empathy, hold on to nuance, hold on to complexity. And as storytellers, as journalists, we love to highlight differences. In a way, we almost fetishize differences. And I want you all to challenge that, to interrogate those differences, and instead focus on how we're similar, focus on all the things we have in common, all the things we share. And in practicing your empathy and compassion for others, extend that to other communities, other people, but also other species and other forms of life that we may not understand yet.
Thank you to you three so much. This was extremely enjoyable, but we are going to now wrap up this panel, and then we're gonna drop a Padlet that is a continuation from yesterday that Joe has just dropped in the chat. So for yesterday, if you guys all joined the chat, we basically talked about the problems that are affecting, conservation and storytelling, and these barriers. But today, we're going to ask you to talk about the solutions. How do you overcome the barrier? So if you can use the comment function and then write a potential solution to barriers you see, how you overcome this barrier, how can you work together? Do you know organizations that could help? But while you do that, I will be giving some closing thoughts and final words, starting to talk about 1 million letters for nature. So 1 million letters campaign is super important, and basically what it is that it's to amplify conservation and education work through storytelling by asking young people worldwide, all over the world, just to write letters addressing to world leaders and advocating for the protection of nature. These are very heartfelt. These are very powerful. These are very moving, and I think that's what we need. We need emotion to move world leaders rather than just cold hard facts, because cold hard facts are rather easy to ignore. So we do match every letter we receive with $3, which is a lot, toward conservation, enough to protect a classroom-sized area of forest. I can't stress how much we should be pushing this campaign, 1 million letters. Please tell everyone you know to do it. Young people, no matter how old they are, send them to the 1 million letters campaign at Reserva's website. That link is also in the chat and also on the website, so please check that out. And then to the next. So conservation is group work, and we would love your help. There are fundraisers created for Reserva, the Youth Land Trust, on Facebook and Instagram, and that will go to our youth-funded reserves, and that is currently matched dollar by dollar by Rainforest Trust. And as I said earlier, please contribute to 1 million letters for nature to conserve a classroom-sized area of forest. Think about how much that is. Sorry about that. Think about how much that is. That's incredible. Organizations interested in partnering, please do email. The more info is listed there with reservaylt.org. Follow and share on Instagram, ReservaYLT again. So young people, kids, this is a fantastic opportunity. And then if you'd like to get to know our team, that is on Expedition Field Notes, also on the website. And Run for the Rainforest, this is very exciting. This is big news. So Run for the Rainforest 2.0 is launching April 22nd, and it is going to be running through May 22nd to raise funds for the Dracula Youth Reserve. And so our goal is to have 1,000 runners. We really hope you're one of them. So please do join, bridge that love for exercise and working out for saving the rainforest, because it's just one of the easiest way to do it. And all you need to do is sign up on our website and you'll get a runner's pack, and you'll essentially get all the information you need from there. So it's going to be great. Please do sign up. If your organization, as Joe has mentioned in the chat, would like to be an official supporter for Run for the Rainforest, please email Joe at joe@reservaYLT.org. So I think we are now out of time. Please do join okay, we are out of time. Please do join Run for the Rainforest and also 1 Million Letters campaign. Thank you guys so much for being a part of this, and we loved hearing from all of our panels, and I hope everyone had a wonderful time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to everyone who came.
Thank you.
Thank you. It was very, very informative and educative. Thank you.
Thank you.
Should I just end the session, or like just
I think the tech lead will probably
Okay.
end, but yeah, you guys, you nailed that. That was so good. Thank you so much. And to everyone who's still on here, thanks for coming. It's really exciting to see all the participants.
Thank to you, Kali. You inspired us.
Yes.
My pleasure.
Can I also just say what an incredible lineup of women in conservation?
We had a man too. There was a comment on the Instagram post that was like, why are only like a quarter of them men? What happened? Did they all die or something? I was like, oh, sorry about that. I didn't we didn't really do that consciously, but this definitely turned into like a girl power hour, and that was awesome.
That is my kind of hour, girl power, yay.
I don't know if this chat is saved, but I really hope that we can snag some of the links and stuff out of this chat that people have dropped in.
I think if they've recorded it, they should get a copy of the chat. So hopefully we'll be able to pick that up. We'll have to chase Amru, tech volunteer. He's here. Maybe you can answer that question.
And I'm guessing Amru also has to end the event, unless Shruti is able to.
I can end it. I've just been having too much of a good time. Okay, well, I'll end the event now. Anyone that needs to say anything last minute, please go ahead, or I'm ending it. 3, 2, 1. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.